Good afternoon and welcome to the 2022 Legislative Staff Week. I'm so excited to be celebrating with you and thank you for joining us for today's webinar, It's Magic, How to Bring Rituals to Work in Turbulent Times. My name is Martha Wigton. I'm the Director of the House Budget and Research Office in Georgia and the immediate past staff chair of NCSL. Fabulously happy to be moderating today's conversation. Before I introduce Erica Keswin, I want to review just a few housekeeping items. Today's online meeting platform is for an information exchange, but we want to engage you and your participation and questions are encouraged. So don't forget to use the Q&A box for questions for our speaker and the chat box to connect with the other attendees. Today's webinar, as usual, is being recorded, but it'll only be available for 10 days on NCSL's website. So finally, I'd love to know who's with us today. Please say a quick hello in the chat and tell us the states that you're from. This is great. I'm seeing folks from all over the nation. So exciting. And it's Staff Week. We should be celebrating and connecting across the boundaries of our states. So thanks for joining, everybody. This is fabulous. Well, as we still load all of our friends' names into the chat box, I want to just talk a little bit about our speaker, because I'm excited to talk about the power and magic of workplace rituals with our best-selling author and workplace strategist, Erica Keswin. You know, Erica has spent the last 20 years working with the most iconic brands in the world as a consultant, a speaker, a writer, and a professional dot connector. Her newest book, Rituals Roadmap, The Human Way to Transform Everyday Routines into Workplace Magic, is a #2 Wall Street Journal bestseller. And it's an indispensable guide to those of us who are trying to take employee engagement to the next level. Erica believes that relationships are the most powerful driver of success for individuals and organizations that are striving to attract and retain our talent. And as Erica contends, rituals are the tools of the human workplace. In today's discussion, you're going to learn more about what makes a ritual, why it matters, and how you can incorporate more rituals into your office. So we're going to get started. And instead of Erica just presenting on the topic, we decided to have sort of a fireside chat format about the topic of workplace rituals. And if you want to ask Erica a question, please put it in the Q&A box and we'll endeavor to try and get some of those questions answered today during our conversation. So Erica, welcome so much to the NCSL family. We're so glad that you're here. Can you just tell us a little bit about yourself, your background, and sort of what got you interested in rituals and creating a more human employee experience?
Great. Well, thank you for that introduction. Hi, everybody. I guess I should have put in the chat. I live in New York City, but I'm currently in Washington, D.C. right now. I was telling the folks before we went live that I do some work with the U.S. Olympic Committee. So it's really cool. It's actually a ritual where after the Olympics, the athletes come and go to the White House. And so we've been having a bunch of meetings and talking about career development with the athletes that are retiring. And then tomorrow they go to the White House. So love being part of this ritual. So, you know, my background is in human capital, which I describe as helping organizations improve performance through people. And, you know, some people will say to me, either directly to me or maybe behind my back, you know, oh, that's the soft stuff. And I'm a big believer, especially in this digital age, in this age of technology where so many jobs are changing because of the technology, that at the end of the day, what we have left is our people. And it may seem like the soft stuff, but it's really the hard stuff and the really important stuff. And so that's what I am passionate about. And I wrote my first book, Bring Your Human to Work, in 2018, with the idea that, you know, creating a better workplace for people is not only good for people, but it's also good for business, which seems like everybody should understand, but some people just, it took them a little bit longer to come around to that. And so my approach to this work is to not only share the stories and case studies that will, you'll be hearing some today, but also the science behind why this stuff matters. And the Rituals book came out after Bring Your Human to Work. And I had this epiphany one day. I was actually out to dinner in New York City with a colleague where we go to the same restaurant once a month. And so it's become a ritual. And it occurred to me that when I thought back to all the different leaders that I interviewed for Bring Your Human to Work, one of the things that they were all doing, even though they weren't calling them rituals, was that's a tool that all of them were using to create a better workplace. And I had this sort of light bulb moment. I equate writing a book to having a child. If any of you on the call are parents, after you have the first one, you forget the pain and suffering. And then you think, all right, I guess I'm going to go back to the well and do this again. And so my second book baby, Rituals Roadmap, was born. And I decided to do a deep dive into the science of rituals, which I'm really excited to share with you today.
So just to make sure that we're all kind of on the same page, tell me how you define a ritual. And then you talked about return on investment if we use rituals. Can you talk about that a little bit inside work and maybe for our personal lives?
Yeah, sure. So here is my working definition of a ritual. It has 3 component parts. The first is a ritual is something to which we assign a certain amount of meaning and intention. So part 1. Part 2, a ritual is something that typically has a regular cadence. It could be something that, we do every morning. It could be something that we do once a week, once a year. Here I was just talking about being as part of the Olympics. This ritual with the Olympics is every 4 years. So it doesn't matter what the cadence is, but it typically happens at some regular cadence. The third part, though, is really cool. And I hadn't discovered it until I got deep into the science of rituals, which is a ritual is something that goes beyond its practical purpose. So, I shared a little bit of this on the podcast, if anybody listening, but I think it bears repeating. So here I am in this not so beautiful hotel room. And I tried to make it look a little spiffy, but there's really nothing in here. And let's say the lights go out and I light a candle because I need to see what I'm doing. That's not a ritual, but let's say I decide to light a candle every day at 6 o'clock to signify and really highlight that demarcation between my work day and my time at home. I'm not lighting that candle for a practical purpose to see anything. I'm doing it because it means something to me. And so as we go forward and have this conversation about rituals, I think you should keep that in mind. And again, even bringing it back to what I'm doing today here at this hotel with the Olympic Committee, it's kind of cool for these athletes to go to the White House, but there's no practical purpose. But everybody, they know when they become an Olympic athlete that it's a ritual and there's meaning and it's what they do. Now, the ROI is a really important piece because why are we even here talking about this today? What is the return on our investment? To articulate that, I came up with an equation that I call the 3 Ps of rituals. And this is what rituals give us. The first P is psychological safety, that rituals give us this sense of belonging. The second P is purpose, that rituals give us an opportunity to connect to purpose and to values, our own values, but also, we're going to think about this through the lens of each of our organizations because we all work for different places. When you add those 2 together, you get the third P, which is that boost of performance. Now, individually, what the data shows is that when we feel connected, when we feel like we can be our true selves, have that sense of trust with our manager, when we're, the last time all of you were sort of in person with a group of people, our oxytocin, which is that feel-good hormone, goes up, and our cortisol, our stress, goes down. So there literally is this physiological response in our bodies when we feel connected to others and to ourselves. From a work perspective, gosh, there's so many, but I guess one that jumps out to me, there's a study that found that when you feel that sense of belonging and work. Collaboration goes up by over something like 46%, and productivity can go up by up to 50%. So the numbers are real. And what we'll get into is that rituals are really accessible to all of us. They don't have to cost anything, and they can make us all feel really good.
So the name of your company, the Spaghetti Project, came from a ritual from Cornell, a Cornell study. Will you tell us a little bit about that and how that connection, the impact it made on work for you?
Yeah, sure. Yep. So I found this study when I was writing Bring Your Human to Work, and I talk about it actually in both books. And the study came out of Cornell University, and it was done by a guy named Kevin Niffen. And Kevin grew up, his dad was a firefighter. And so he grew up literally hanging out in the firehouses with mostly the guys in the firehouses. And so when he was getting his PhD that was going to focus on team performance, what makes one team higher performing than another team, and had to study a group of people, he thought, you know what, I'm going to study the firehouses. So the short version of what he found was that the firefighters who were the most dedicated to the ritual, to the tradition of the firehouse meal, sitting around the table, you know, shooting the breeze, connecting as humans, it actually correlated with higher performance, and those firefighters saved more lives. So that was, to me, when I heard this study, like a true goosebump moment. I'm like, oh, I mean, it was something that I knew intuitively. And now there was this amazing study and data to back it up. And I call my company the Spaghetti Project, sort of as a hats off to the firefighters, because their stereotypical go-to meal in the firehouse is spaghetti and meatballs, or just spaghetti. And interestingly, in the rituals book, there's a whole chapter on meetings, but then there's a whole chapter on eatings. And, you know, it starts off with the firefighter, but it just talks about, and even culturally all over the world, there's a lot of traditions around food and how food can bring us together.
So tell me some more of your favorite rituals from the book.
It's like almost asking me which is my favorite child, although each child thinks that they're my favorite. So, you know, there's so many interesting ones. I mean, the rituals that are the most sticky, that just work and have sort of withstood the test of time, are often connected to an organization's values. So, you know, one that jumps out, and I'm sure for many of you on the call today, you've onboarded all these different people during the pandemic, and you probably even met them in person. And I think this ritual that I'll share is so important. It was important before the pandemic, and I think it continues to be really, really important. And those are rituals around onboarding. You know, how can you make people feel connected to your mission, to your values, to each other, literally from the first moment they step in the door or step on the Zoom, you know, whatever the case may be. So the example is from Kind Bar, if anybody's had one of those Kind bars. And Daniel Lubetzky was the founder and CEO. Now he's the executive chairman. And during the onboarding, every quarter, as a part of their onboarding, they group together all of the new hires into a cohort. And Daniel spends some time with them talking about the history of the organization. And Daniel's father was in the Holocaust and was saved by this family that showed him a great deal of kindness. And Daniel himself, you know, wouldn't be alive if it wasn't for this family. And so, you know, it's why he called the company Kind Bar, and so much of their values and how they think about the company and the world and how they give back is all around kindness. And so it's this moment where every quarter, all of these new hires get to sit with the founder and hear his story and hear the mission and the values of the organization, and, you know, remind people why they came to work there, remind people why they get up and, you know, do what they do every day. Because even at an organization as purposeful as Kind, or as purposeful, you know, in many of your organizations, you know, given the work that you all do, we all still have a bad day at work. So again, it goes back to the 3 Ps, this opportunity to connect to purpose makes a big difference. So that's one I really like. Another one at the total other end of the spectrum, Rituals can come from anywhere, top down, bottom up, inside out. It's hard to, if you hear about a ritual at another organization, you could say, hey, you know what, I'm going to try this at mine, may work, may not. But they really can come from anywhere. So my second fun example is from Allbirds, the sneaker company, the felt sneaker company, and started by a guy who, not the most senior, just a normal person working there. And he went to the doctor one day and decided that he really wanted to focus on his health and wellness. And he set a goal for himself that he was going to do a certain amount of push-ups between now and the end of the year. And he divided that number by the number of days left in the year. And he said, you know what, the number came out to be 40. So he said to himself, if I do 40 push-ups every day between now and the end of the year, I'm going to reach my goal. So this is pre-pandemic. So what does he do? He starts doing push-ups in the afternoon, and the guy next to him joined, and the woman down the hall joined. And before he knew it, every day at 4 o'clock, people were either doing push-ups, watching the push-ups, talking about the push-ups, and it became a ritual. And it is still to this day called 40 at 4. They were doing them online during the pandemic. And it just, people would laugh and did all these fun things with it. But people just felt that sense of belonging and connection, and also brought some, they knew this was coming. And, one of the things about rituals, especially in the pandemic, lives have been very chaotic and stress has been up. And I think that 40 at 4, everybody knew at 4 o'clock, if you felt like opting in, this was happening, and gave people a sense of normalcy.
Yeah, I think that legislative staff, we share purpose in what we do. All of us have a piece of that purpose, the sense of belonging. I'd be so curious to know what some of our people online here are doing. In fact, don't forget, everybody, you're welcome to join this conversation. So put your chat questions in here. Yeah. Part of legislative staff too, that you talked about that piqued my interest, is being able to recognize and reward using rituals to use that. And as a staff manager, I love also that you add it's free. In a lot of ways, rituals can be free. So how we can use those as a tool, I would love to hear some of your examples.
100%. So I'm gonna share a couple things. The first is, for those of you, and we would love to see some of your rituals in the chat. I'm going to get into the rewarded recognition and give a couple of cool examples. But before I do that, when I was interviewing people for the book, I would explain what a ritual is. I would talk about the ROI, and then I would say, okay, what are your rituals? And sometimes people still didn't know. And I came up with this sort of magic question that when asked, all of a sudden people at Chipotle and LinkedIn and DoSomething.org, for-profit, not-for-profit, would be like, that's my ritual. So I'm going to share this magic question, and then maybe that will spur some ideas and you can put them in the chat. The question is, and I know you all work for different organizations, but you can sort of fill in the blank. When do you feel most, Chipotle's in the book. I'll pick Chipotle in case we all like to eat there. When do associates feel most Chipotle-ish, most LinkedIn-ish, most budget office-ish, whatever your organization is, when do you feel most connected? And when I asked the founder and the CEO of Allbirds, when does he feel most, Allbirds-ish, he was like, every day at 4 o'clock. Somebody just put in, we all walk together at 10 and 2. I love that. Weekly check-ins. All right, keep putting them in. I'll go to recognition and then we'll read some of these out. I just love hearing it. And what's really cool is some people will say to me, we always did this, but now after I hear the definition of a ritual, wow, this really is a ritual. And a ritual is not something you force people to do. It's you create it, and it's almost like a pull, like people miss it. Fun quizzes at the end of staff meetings, somebody just wrote. And how do you know if it's a ritual? People would really miss it if it went away, which again is why people are so excited to be where I am right now, because in the last Olympics, they couldn't do this. So team check in at 2. Okay, lots of great examples. So rewarded recognition, I know is something that you all are thinking about, as part of this legislative week. So here's 2 examples that I wanted to share. And again, both of them literally cost nothing. The first is a woman shared this with me. Her name is Shanna Hawking, and she works, actually, she just left, but for years, 10 years, she worked at the Philadelphia Children's Hospital. And when she was right out of college, her manager came to her and said, gave her a manila folder. So maybe I'm wrong. Maybe it's not free, but maybe it's 10 cents for a manila folder. And she said, okay, Shanna, here is your Atta Girl folder. And Shanna was like, what? Hadn't even heard the phrase Atta Girl. And she said, well, what is this? She's like, you need to keep this, literally this physical folder, and fill it with all of your accomplishments, print them out and stick them in this folder. And she said, this is going to be your cheerleader that you need on days when things don't always go the way you have planned. And she went on to say, this is going to remind you of how amazing you are. And I just thought that is so awesome. And it's also become a ritual for Shanna as a leader now. I mean, she started this when she was 22 years old. Now she has a number of people reporting to her that when somebody new starts, she in turn gives them a folder. So it ends up being sort of a ritual for the person getting it and a ritual for Shanna. And when she has her one-on-ones and gets together, she has the person bring it and they really can remember all of the amazing things they did. So that was one of my favorites. A second one, and the other thing that's so cool about these, it's just not rocket science. It's about the intention of wanting to do it. The second one is from a CEO that's in the book, Bill Koenigsberg, who is the founder and CEO of a marketing company called Horizon Media. It's an independently owned marketing firm. And in 1989, when it started, he would write a letter to just, a few people that worked there to thank them for what they did. Fast forward, and then pre-pandemic, and I'll talk about what he's doing now. He was writing 3,000 letters a year. And he also had his own little ritual where he only wrote in a green pen. And he said that if he was a little bit delayed or was on vacation and somebody didn't get their letter, trust me, he was getting that phone call, or his assistant was getting the phone call. Where is my letter? And it was really hard during the pandemic. People were not in the office, and it was much more difficult logistically. And I mean, even the shutdown, like just getting the post office, it was not going to work anymore. So he pivoted, which I think we all need to do. Think about rituals we can maintain, think about new rituals, but be flexible. Where he started to have a video call with anybody on a given day that was celebrating his or her anniversary. So sometimes he was literally doing them every day. It was rare that he didn't have a day where somebody had started on that day. And what was really cool about it was that, if I started and Martha, it turned out that you and I started on the same day and maybe we're in different offices, we didn't know each other. All of a sudden, we're both on this call celebrating our anniversaries. And it was a way for people to get to know different people around the company and have a video call, sort of the very intimate with the CEO. So those are just a few. And again, it's just deciding that this is something that's important, as a leader and bringing this to your organization. I would also say that if you're listening to this call and I think this stuff is beneficial for people more junior in the organization, that you can bring these ideas to people that you work for, to say, what, there's science behind it. And, we want to retain our people. We want people to feel engaged. We want people to give 110%, even on and we do have bad days. So I think top down, bottom up really can work.
Yeah, I'm curious about that too, how it does seem in sort of knee-jerk reaction that it would come from the top to the bottom, but it really could perk from the bottom to the top.
Yeah, I mean, I've had people, and people will say to me, "Oh, my manager will never be into this," and what do I do? I go in with, the data and say, "Look, I mean, there's science behind this," and sharing some of that and saying, just give it a shot, and it doesn't have to cost anything. So I think lead with some of the data and some of the studies that show that that connection really does have an impact. Tell them the story of the firefighters and start from there. A lot of the data, it's kind of hard to ignore.
You mentioned just briefly, and I saw a question in the chat, how do you know when a ritual is run its course?
It's a really important question. I try to take my ego out of it. Like, if you hear this and you're like, I got it, Erica says we should do push-ups, let's do push-ups. And people are like, are you kidding me? you're like, okay, you know what, this didn't work, let's try something else. I also think you can ask people, what are the kinds of things that you think could bring people together, and continuing to ask for feedback. Again, when you can really align it to your values and your purpose, it tends to work the best. One thing that really struck me, rituals done well can be really inclusive and really motivating. But there are times where it can have the opposite effect. And so when I ask people that question of, when do people feel most, fill in the blank company-ish, a couple of people literally, I could see them turn like white as a ghost. I'm like, what's going on? One person said, wow, now that I'm thinking about this, the only times that we come together really as an organization is around happy hour or around drinking. And, I'm not anti happy hour and bringing people together in that way, but if it's the only way that you connect, there will be people that don't feel comfortable. And I had somebody reach out to me that say that they had been in rehab and new to a company and didn't want to not go. And so, that stuff's really important. And then another person shared with me that they said, wow, everything we do like around bonding and connecting is after work. It's late. And, what about the people who, this is pre-pandemic, but, what about the people that are going to go and like pick up kids or take care of an elderly parent? And so think about these rituals through the lens of inclusion, and if they're important, which I believe that this is part of work. This is not, let's all do our busy work, let's not do our computer work and our work, and then we'll try to bond later. Building connections and relationships at work is part of work, and it should be valued. And then, and so brought into the middle of the workday, not every day, but it will make an impact.
Speaking of recognition, NCSL also has a free way that we can do that. This week, you can go to the NCSL website or through one of our emails and do a shout out, which just simply recognize someone on a national level for the work that they've been doing. And it takes 2 minutes to do it. And if you're on the receiving end of that, that is such a validation of some of the hard work that you do. So definitely encourage everybody watching to do that. And maybe one of our friends can put that in the chat for the link for other things. But a part of that too is gratitude. And you talk a great deal about the importance of gratitude and the science of gratitude and saying just thank you. Do you mind expounding on that for us a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, the science of gratitude is real, and it has a direct impact on increased job satisfaction, the deepening of relationships. And if any of you have looked into the science of rituals, it is just as impactful to the recipient as the person giving, the kudos. Somebody, Natalie, just put into the chat, our office does shout outs in a Slack channel, which is a great way to leverage technology for some of this stuff called kudos. And talk about something that's free and something that, I would say it's pretty easy. It's about being intentional and just making time for it. I had a person recently that shared that a new ritual that she came up with her team, that every Friday in the afternoon, she would thank one person who really went above and beyond in that week and did something that really made a difference. And she just said the impact was unbelievable. And then that they began to pay it forward to people in other teams, and it sort of just spread. And so actually the last and Bring Your Human to Work, the whole last chapter is just called Say Thanks, and all about the science of rituals and examples of how to bring this to your organization. I would say it loudly and say it often.
That's great advice. That's great advice. Folks are feeling very stressed in the workplace too. And I think this ties into ways that we can help alleviate some of that stress. Can you talk just a little bit about the culture of wellness in the office place?
Yeah. I think the stress these days is at an all-time high with loneliness and isolation. I'd say one of the few upsides of this pandemic is sort of the destigmatization of some of that, where companies are really focusing on, not only, on both the physical health, the mental health, really looking at people more holistically. And so that I think has been a real positive. One tip here, which I think is, again, to me, some of the coolest things that I've learned are these little nuggets of wisdom that are quote unquote easy, but it just takes intention. A leader shared that we've all been in this meeting where, we're sitting here in a group, and let's say, Martha, you're in my meeting and I'm running the meeting, and I say, okay, everybody, how are you doing? Okay, Martha, how are you doing? Like, you hear me and you're like, she really doesn't want to, like, she just asked me that, but like, or even if I didn't say it as badly as that, but I'm like, okay, how's everybody doing? You still might not really think that I care or I want to connect in that way. This one leader said they shifted to, in their meetings, or their weekly team meeting, they shifted it by saying, okay, everybody, how are you really, really doing? And think about how you can bring that into your one-on-one conversations, and then pause, like, how are you really, really doing? And in the beginning of the pandemic, leaders were spending probably the entire meeting checking in. 6 months into the pandemic, this is not exact science, but from what people told me anecdotally, 30 minutes of a 60-minute meeting checking in, because we were focusing on safety, and everything was up in the air, and people were scared and unsure of just really everything in life. We're happy to be getting back to normal, but we do still need to be checking in. So I think the challenge for many of us now is, how do we balance checking in and really connecting with people and being willing and able to help them on stress and challenging issues, but we also have to get work done. And so one idea that a few leaders have been doing, they call it different things, but let's say you have 8 people on your team and you have everybody go around, and we could have started our meeting like this today. Everybody go and share one word in the chat that describes how you're showing up today. So somebody, I'd say excited, somebody, right, that you exhausted, and and you go around the Zoom and everybody says a word, and the goal is not, you're not going to solve it. You're not going to dive in. It's a moment where you all check in. It's inclusive. Everybody participates. But if you're the person running the meeting and someone uses a word and you're like, wow, something I think is going on with Martha, and you call her later, and someone just shared recently that they did this with their group and found out that the spouse of one of their employees was having some really stressful kidney surgery that they might not have known about. And so it's a way to check in. It doesn't take the whole meeting, but you're still connecting with people as humans. And I guess it's a way to take the pulse of your team, take the pulse of the organization, and make it a ritual in the beginning of a meeting, and people will know that it's coming.
Yeah, these are great ideas for just compiling things in your office that are easy to do, that keep people connected and grounded, and enforcing friendships and those relationships. And as legislative staffers, we're all about relationships. This is what we do.
Yep.
I love the idea of recognizing people for free, but we had a question in the chat too about, remember the days of the gold watches? Giving small gifts and tokens of appreciation at landmarks, anniversaries, or maybe certain milestones in careers. What do you think about that? Does that still have a place in our?
I think it, again, I think it can. I think it's about the organization. But if you look at what people are writing into the chat, Bethany says our HR department uses this week to leave little notes and little treats. It can be a gold watch. It could be, it's, in the thought that counts, the words that count. You can leave little fun things that, again, maybe are really connected, to the soul of your specific organization. So I'm not anti, gold watches or, different kinds of things. And somebody wrote in the chat, certain people can't accept certain things. So then for sure, you don't want to do that, but it's within the context of your organization and what you can do or not do. but sometimes it's literally picking up the phone or again, sending a note to tell that person how much what they've done has impacted you. So I think that can be as meaningful, that it's less about the dollars.
We have a tradition in our office. We have a traveling trophy. And that moves around the office. It's awarded by your peers when they see you do something, really good or magnanimous, or you worked really hard to get something over the finish line. And I think that's a useful tool that we have. Would love to see some more ideas put into the chat that even later NCSL might be able to publish out to the rest of us to be able to use. I think
with the traveling trophy, does the person who got it this week, then they themselves give it to the person the following week?
They do.
Yeah,
they do. And it moves around and it goes from office to office. And we track those and then reward after you've received it X number of times with maybe an hour or two of comp time or something similar. And yeah, just a way to recognize. I think the recognition coming from your peers is a very powerful way of connecting the dots too. Would love to see more ideas for that. I think that as a director, sometimes we feel like we're starting from scratch, that we don't have a ritual and we need to do something now after this conversation, recognizing how helpful it will be. Do you think we need to always start from scratch, or should we look around and see if maybe some of these things fall into rituals that we're doing in our offices already? Any ideas?
Yeah, so I would say a couple of things. The first is I just want to comment on what Maureen wrote, where she said, I think the leader needs to go first in some of these things and sharing where they are so people know it's okay. I do think that oftentimes, especially if you're sharing things that are, more vulnerable or more human, I do think that leaders need to model some of this. You can't expect other people to do it if you as the leader don't do it yourself. To your question about where do we start? I like to ask that question, ask people in your office, so when do you feel most, fill in the blank ish? And you're like, oh yeah, it's at that holiday event we have. Oh yeah, it's during legislative week when we get that little treat. Or again, as Bethany wrote, today we got door hangers telling us we're the key. Like, oh wow, each year we do get something different. And so chances are there are things going on in all of your organizations that, again, you may not see them as rituals. If you really don't feel like there's anything that you do, the way that the book is structured, think about the employee experience, sort of the journey, and where are there opportunities for rituals. So starting in the beginning, what are these onboarding rituals? What happens on the first day? And again, I think that is, as a whole separate conversation, onboarding right now is so important. Do we have rituals in meetings? One of the things I say in the book is beginnings and endings are prime rituals real estate. So the beginning or ending of a meeting, the beginning and the ending of a project, the beginning and ending of something in the legislative world. I mean, you guys probably work on things that are fairly cyclical. So there's probably some, beginnings, middle, and endings. Professional development, recognition, all of the things we're talking about, kind of map out that employee experience and be like, are there any things that we do, eatings, do we eat together? Somebody talked about the cornhole tournament, the annual cornhole tournament, and so how do you know it's a ritual? You'd miss if it went away. And if you really are starting from scratch, bring your team together and say, all right, what can we try? And maybe, I often think we're having a lot of Zoom meetings these days. So, how could we kick off a meeting and maybe start there?
Well, two questions in the chat brought up some thoughts for me too, when you're doing rituals, that they should be inclusive. And someone asked, well, how do you get buy-in? Not in my office, but in a lot of office, there's one person who really doesn't want to do some of these activities. So would love for you to address that. But also someone else wrote the chat, sometimes we don't feel included, like it only applies to a certain section of the staff. So both of those things, how do you get buy-in and how do you include everybody?
Yeah. So, the buy-in, can be hard. I'm like, when you ask that, I'm always picturing like the one person with the eye roll, like, really? Are we really? So I go in and I kind of lead with data to say, the soft stuff is often the hard stuff and can be the most important stuff. And say, look, we're going to give it a shot. One woman started in a new leadership role, and she really didn't know anybody because she was new, and they had brought in a lot of people, and she came up with something and definitely had these eye rolls. And she's like, just give it a shot. We're all going to do it once. And if we decide that we're not going to do it again, fine, we'll try to come up with something else. And leading with, look, many of us are not in the office full time. I mean, I'm not sure where everybody kind of is in that spectrum right now with the pandemic, but with hybrid work, and it's really changing. So I think with some naysayers, it's almost saying this stuff is even more important now from a business perspective, because, people tend to leave if they don't feel connected. So if you bring somebody up to speed for 18 months and they're kicking butt in their job, and then all of a sudden they don't feel so connected and they leave, like, there's a business case for this stuff. So this woman shared with me that she started a ritual where once a week, a different person did this, and they shared their origin story, which I thought was just such a cool, like, it could really mean anything, but they were, kind of like the firefighters, right? Getting to know each other as people. So it's like, okay, Erica, like, what's your origin story? I could start anywhere. I could start with my childhood. I could start about my job. And she said that she had a couple eye rollers. And then by the time they all went around and did it, people are like, they were bummed when the last person finished, because they got to know each other. And they were like, oh, I didn't know that you also grew up here. I didn't know that this was your favorite food, whatever it is. And, if you have introverts in your group, you let them know way ahead when they're going to go, because you don't want to surprise them and they may not feel as comfortable, doing something like that. So in the lens of inclusivity, just really think about this from different people's perspective. But she said after they finished, they were like, we need to come up with a new thing and go around again. So, and if they had all hated it, then the idea is, come up with something else.
Well, you mentioned in the book that you sort of need to check your ego at the door. You got to take some risk to try and do a ritual and put yourself out there and be willing to pivot or pirouette as needed if it doesn't work. But you also talked about pulling rather than pushing. Can you kind of give folks an idea of what that means and how that helps create a ritual?
Yeah, I mean, the hope is, using some of the examples that I shared, when you at Kind Bar, like when you get a job there and they only do this onboarding thing once a quarter, and you get there and you've heard, oh, have you had your, quarterly meeting, with Daniel Lubetzky, and you're sort of looking like you're like, oh, I went out, when am I going to get to do it? Or Motley Fool, actually, it's a company based here in DC, and they have coffee with the founders and a whole group of people. And they were like, oh, have you had it yet? And so you're not being, and no, you don't have to go, but the idea is that it's something that's really a part of the culture where you just feel pulled to, to want to do it. Again, the 40 at 4 is not a rule. You don't have to get push-ups, but it's funny in the rituals book, I call it the no smoke break rituals, because back in the day, I'm 53. So, people they're not smoking as much anymore, but they're smoking, a lot back then, and taking smoke breaks, which we know is terrible for your health. And so the idea was that's another idea actually for people who want to get started, whether it's in person or on Zoom. We are sitting way too much. I mean, we need to get up, we need to get moving. And so you can almost kill two birds with one stone, right? You can get people to connect on something and have everybody get up, stand up. The woman that wrote, you go for a walk twice a day. But there's a whole chapter in the book on the no smoke break ritual. So instead of smoking, do push-ups or have a piece of dark chocolate or go for a walk. But again, another way to bring people together to connect. And you could use the science of, look, you got to get your steps in. We are sitting way too much, especially these days. So, it depends on the person, but just can throw a lot of different ideas and data at people to say, come on, just give it a try.
How can you use a ritual as like a retention tool? We're seeing a lot of turnover and well, everywhere actually, but the Legislative Institute is having that too. Can you talk to me a little bit or all of us about a little bit about that?
Yeah, I mean, people leave, 9 out of 10 people leave their manager. It's less about their job, and they leave when they don't feel connected. And, I think for everybody on this call, you work in this world because it's so purposeful. I mean, we all know you could make more money in a for-profit kind of organization. And so when they look at the data, most people don't leave. And even now, and especially now in light of this great resignation, and people were home for 2 years and really thinking about who they are and their purpose and their values, that, and the Gallup, well-known Gallup study that shows that, the people that stay at companies have a best friend at work. So if you're not investing in figuring out ways for people to feel connected, the next time, there might be somebody who is, at a cocktail party or out on the soccer field or on a bus commuting, and we're at the grocery store and someone's like, hey, listen to what I do. If you have these rituals where people stay connected and you get to know people as humans and you're laughing and just doing things that feel meaningful, you still might leave, but you're less likely to jump when you're like, oh my gosh, I would have to leave all my friends when we do push-ups every day at 4 o'clock, or I'd miss the annual cornhole, tournament, or, these letters that I get from my manager. It's hard to prove this stuff, but the data and the stories all really support the return on creating opportunities for connection.
I think there's also something that you mentioned that's a little formal for retention rituals, the stay interview. I thought that was really interesting. Do you mind talking about that for a few minutes?
Yeah, sure. So it's really funny. This is really new because it just happened a couple weeks ago, and I'll talk about the stay interview. But I do think that there's this I think it's really important to, almost re-recruit people. It's like reminding people why they do what they do. And so, we often interview people on the way in, and then we can do exit interviews when someone's already left. But what about, interviewing people about, why they love it here and why they're staying, and celebrating that they're staying. And what just happened recently was I was on LinkedIn and I saw this post, and it was like, I'm just here, to announce and to tell everybody. And then there were like a few spaces. And so you had to scroll down. So I assumed this guy was leaving, and he actually was writing the post to celebrate that he was staying. And he's like, everybody posts on here when they're getting this new job, but I'm all in, and I just had this meeting at work, and it's almost like this, I don't know, it's like a recommitment, if you decide to renew your vows, being married all these years, but this recommitment to why you do what you do. And so that could actually be, I hadn't thought about it like that until just now. That could be a funny ritual for a company, to having like a wedding or a recommitment, some kind of funny ceremony. But yeah, talk to people and celebrate why they're staying, collect those stories and share them with people. And I think that, these people want to hold on to those, and you can share some of those stay interview stories with new hires as part of your onboarding to make them feel even more excited about the organization they just decided to join.
You mentioned that folks stay because they feel comfortable in their workspace. And also you have mentioned in the podcast, which I encourage everyone to download, the podcast for Staff Week features Erica and more about rituals, was psychological safety in your workplace. Are there ways that we can ensure that our peers feel like they're in a psychological safe space? It's a little complicated, I know, but there may be some examples of how we can foster that.
Right. To me, psychological safety is being comfortable being you at work and asking a question and giving your thought and not having to check the real you at the door. Now, it's funny, when I wrote Bring Your Human to Work, people would say, really? You want me to bring like my whole human? Now, we need, the caveat is that this is work, right? We're talking about a workplace. So we do want to be appropriate and, professional in that way. But we do want people to feel that they can be them. I mean, you do want somebody to feel comfortable pointing out that something isn't working or something is wrong or someone did something inappropriate. I mean, from a business perspective. And so, it goes back to, I think it was Maureen when she asked about the question of leaders, the more a leader, now there's going to be a continuum where not everybody's going to be as comfortable with this than others. But being a little vulnerable, sharing what's going on in your life. Like if you're the boss, people are like, oh, she has it all figured out. She doesn't have the same stresses that I do. And during the pandemic, people did this more. Some organizations told me that their employee engagement, went up because we didn't have a choice. Like in many of our homes, like whether we were the executive director, the CEO, the most junior, I mean, everybody's homes were insane in terms of chaos and dogs and kids and the technology blowing up. So we were almost forced to bring a little bit more of ourselves. So I urge everybody kind of now, as things have calmed down a bit, to create that sense of psychological safety, because goes back to that pandemic flux syndrome. It's like 3 steps forward, 1 step back, and then there's a new variant. Like we're still on edge and stressed. The more that you can, share a little bit and be vulnerable. Chris just wrote in the chat, sharing your mistakes, being willing to do that. Our team, Wendy wrote, our team of editors periodically has an airing of errors. I love that. And it goes back again to what Maureen said, you got to lead by example. If you want other people to, it's walk the walk. If you want other people to feel comfortable sharing, to feel comfortable telling you, oh my gosh, this is what's going on right now in my life. This is why I may not be 110% given what at work. If you want to know that as a peer, you want to know it so you can step in and help. As a leader, you want to know that because it has an impact on your organization.
That's great advice. And all together, looking at everything comprehensively, just knowing that there's data that we can improve productivity by 50%, that there's an appeal here, not only for those who appreciate the data behind it, but the sense of belonging. And steeped in our institution of traditions, there's a real place for rituals in everything that we do. I want to thank everybody who chose to participate and put their information in the chat. I encourage you to read the book. It's amazing, and incorporate some of this in your personal life just as easily as you can in your professional life. Start something new and different in your office. And Erica, what a fabulous commentator you are. We so appreciate you sharing your expertise with us today. Incredible information, and I think really usable, that all of us will bring back to our chambers and our offices and be better for it. So thank you so much for being here.
Well, I'd love to hear from everybody. I'd say a couple of things. One, I just put my email in the chat. And I have a woman on my staff who I have, not for the rituals book, but for Bring Your Human to Work. I have I'm happy to send anybody that wants one, like a digital lookbook of these 10 ways to bring your human to work. I can share that. And keep me posted. And the other thing is, like, let us know what you enjoyed hearing. I'm happy also for a couple of people, tell us what really resonated, and we can then share that out. And I'm happy to pick a couple of people and send one of the rituals book as a thank you from me to you for being part of your legislative week.
Yes, thank you. That's a great offer. Everybody's, oh, I want the book. It's going off in the chat right now, but really appreciate that. Thank you to NCSL for sponsoring this for us, and for all of you who joined us today. Let's keep the celebration going all the way to Friday. Thanks for being here for this hour. We'll see you soon.
Bye. Thank you so much.
Bye. Thanks again, Erica.